welcome to my first official video for Shipper Studios' new series, Pretty Okay Painting. Today, as you can see, this is our model. This is a skeleton from the Reaper/Bones model series. I forget what the exact model name is, but for my comic, this represents one of the Makaris Unworthy. As you can see, he's a skeleton, wields a nice sword and shield. Now, for those of you new to painting, this will act as sort of a primer. This is my little painting handle, so I can hold while I paint. This is my... oh, whoops. Sorry. This is my paint palette pad. It's where I mix paints and thin them. For this, I'm going to be using two brushes, a base coat and a detail brush. The difference is the thickness and length of the brush heads. I've got my colors, specifically Army Painter colors, right here. And I've got my little water well for thinning paints and cleaning brushes. Now, when starting to paint something, you can't just pick something and then go with it. You have to have everything set out, otherwise you're going to miss stuff. Trust me, I've done this. So, taking a look again at our skull boy here, take a look and decide what colors you want. Now, seeing as he is a skeleton, I have my white. The color scheme for Makaris is black and yellow, so I have my black and my yellow. As you can see, he's on some sort of stone structure. Let's see if I can get that done. There. Can't really see it from here, but he has a stone structure, so I've got a gray for stone. He has some straps for like his shield and his spare sword, so I have a nice brown for that. For his actual sword that he's wielding, I have some nice silver gray, with a nice shine effect. And for my shade, I've got a nice shadow wash shade. Now, for those of you who are new to this, what a shade is it really fills in the cracks and allows your model to pop. Admittedly, it's hard to describe, but it definitely helps, because I've had miniatures that I never shaded, and they don't look nearly as good as the miniatures I have shaded. So everything is ready, so we're just going to get into it. Now, first things first, you're going to want to base coat your miniature. Now, what base coating is you cover it all in one color, and that's the deepest color. Usually it's a darker color. In this case, it's going to be my black. That way you're not just filling in all sorts of crevices and possibly smearing paints. Now, base coat's going to be the base of everything. It's going to be 100. Like, first I'm going to do everything in black, and then I'm going to add on colors afterwards. So, doing a base coat, so I have my base coat brush, and what you do is you take your palette pad, let's move you out of the way, and you shake these. You shake these well. Now, some paints shake differently. I like to shake it just a little bit. You don't need a lot. That should be good for what I need. Now, you don't just start painting with this, because the paint's too thick. The paint's going to smear and you're going to obscure details. So what you do is you take some of your water here, and you kind of just thin it out. That should be good. So now we start. Admittedly, for the base coat, it doesn't matter where you start since everything's going to be like that. Remember to use light strokes. There we go. And there we go. Make sure you get everything. I'll add a little more water from this side, just a little more. There we go. Get a nice glossy black. And this is where your painting handle comes in handy, so that you're not getting your fingers or anything. Make sure you get every little crevice. He's going to look nice and good. And hopefully I won't be needing any more black after this. Just thinning it a little more, adding some more. Oops, there we go. Admittedly, I'm not too much an expert on thinning. Like, I haven't found my perfect ratio. Because, like, I know how to thin, I'm just not very good at it. Like, sometimes it's a little thinner and it's a little watery, sometimes it's a little thicker and it smudges. But overall, it's definitely better than not thinning your paints. He's getting there. Alright. And while I'm talking about this, and just base coating, time for a little lore segment about the Unworthy. The Unworthy Army of Makaris. Now, the Unworthy Army is a bunch of skeletons. It's what the Makaris military calls it, and the Unworthy are, well, they're also skeleton zombies and any undead, except vampires, because Makaris hates vampires, but I'll get into that later. There we go. And what the Unworthy Army does is they're basically foot soldiers and cannon fodder. Now, the Kingdom of Makaris does have their own army. They have their own troops, like squires and infantrymen and lots of disposable units. But their favorite is the Unworthy. Because unlike most factions and kingdoms, countries, and anything else in Yevokson, they don't have a problem with necromancy. Whereas most kingdoms will disdain it as mockery, and you can't... There we go. You can't just disrespect the dead like that. Makaris doesn't care. And because they're not bound by that sort of moral quandary, they can resurrect however much dead they want and water you down a bit. And they've got a whole bunch of mindless servants who are able to stand around and... Ooh, that's a little too thin. Stand around and soak up gunfire, arrows, crossbow bolts, artillery, magic, as well as wear down opposing infantry forces. And also you can equip the Unworthy with your own weapons, of like ranged weapons such as bows and crossbows and... Ah, dang it, the air conditioning kicked in. I'm going to have to talk louder then. Alright. Still good. Now you can see he's looking pretty good. Still got a lot to go though. Base coating is definitely one of the longer things to do because you've just got the entire model to cover. They do actually make sprays for this. Like, it's one color, it's just a spray. You quickly spray the model. I do it for some of my models, but for some of them, like, the plastic doesn't work well and it kind of warps or something. So you gotta be careful. But back to the Unworthy Army. Yeah, they soak up damage and they really do nothing. However, the Unworthy aren't relegated to just the army. Because Makaris, although they do have a strong service of knights, also have a lot of merchants. They are a monarchy, but with a very strong merchant class. And while the monarchy and the merchants do work together on multiple occasions, they each have their own method of how to deal with tasks. The monarchy prefers using knights, sometimes the unworthy, whereas the merchants don't want to hire people who are probably going to die, so they prefer using the unworthy. This has led to the merchants being very wealthy, and thus the kingdom of Makaris being wealthy. However, it definitely leads to the stigma where a lot of people don't trust Makaris and their merchants, or the goods they make, simply due to the fact that they use a lot of undead, especially to mine, because they have a lot of mining. That's why their armor is black. It's a special mineral called black iron, which can be made into black iron armor. It's a very dense, thick, and heavy metal, but is very protective and effective. Let's see if you can kind of see. He's kind of coming along. Definitely looking better. Get all those nice nooks and crannies. But, back to the discussion. They use a lot of miners to get it out, and a lot of undead miners, because they don't have to worry about cave-ins, they have to worry about exhaustion. Basically an untiring slave force of little skeletal minions, or zombies. Let's get that. There we go. It's why Makaris goods and services are low cost, but not exactly the most morally efficient. But for the merchants of Makaris, that doesn't matter. Let's get this nice sword. Now, not all unworthy are just mindless zombies. Some unworthy are willing participants and will allow themselves to become skeletons and zombies so that they can have some form of power and control over the others. Plus, it's sort of a form of immortality so long as someone doesn't destroy you or cut you off from your power supply, because zombies and skeletons need power to run, but they don't use electricity like how people need food. They need necrotic energy. Usually it just means bringing them to a necromancer and having the necromancer give them enough magic to where they can keep going. But the spell can be broken and you can lose yourself, which is a reason why the Unworthy Army isn't 100% foolproof, because if something happens, you've got a whole bunch of useless corpses, and they can't do anything because they can't fight, and you just wasted a lot of time and resources in an army that's completely incapable of doing anything other than rotting. It's getting there. Just thinning my paint a little more. Ooh, nice and thick. But not too thick. Don't want to obscure those details. Definitely the thing is, you think you're done, and then it turns out you've got a whole other thing. You've got all these nooks and crannies. Base coating can take a while. definitely got to be patient, but it's definitely worth it. And it's a nice relaxing hobby, too. Just, you really got nothing to do, you can just paint a miniature. A little hard to see the details right now, but that's because of the paint. Thing is, I'm kind of going a little fast because the paint on the palette will dry, so you've got to use it up. There we go. But yeah, back to the Unworthy Army. There we go. Now, other nations and countries can use necromancy to bring back people, but definitely there's a stigma about respecting the dead. Especially since how Makaris does it is they suppress the individuality of the skeletons and zombies. Because you don't necessarily have to. Some people can come back and continue as they were. They're just not as good to look at because they're zombies and skeletons. There are some people who allow themselves to die and come back as liches, and they become even more stronger. But definitely the thing is, for necromancers, when you're raising your undead legions... Thank you, air conditioner, for turning off. When you're raising your undead legions, you can choose to suppress individuality, which definitely can help so your army doesn't rebel or refuse to fight or follow your orders or do anything that you wouldn't approve. The problem was, you've got an entire army centralized to a hive mind, specifically your mind, and you have to take time to issue orders, or you can only issue vague orders, so the undead and the unworthy army aren't very good at specific, jobs. Like, they can't carry out complex assassination plots. They can really go somewhere and do something. They can't really multitask, unless you give them their individuality. But Makaris necromancers do not do that, unless you're a high-ranking person who has chosen to become unworthy. Because, as the name implies, this isn't something you want. Because Makaris does a lot about conformity and doing what you're told. They don't like it when people don't follow their orders. So, as a punishment, if what the person in question has done is bad enough, they become the unworthy. They're killed, raised as zombies and skeletons, and forced to fight. However, it isn't just a complete suppression of individuality. It doesn't just get rid of the soul and it's just necrotic energy. What Makaris necromancers do, as a punishment, is keep the soul trapped in the corpse. And the corpse has to obey the commands of the necromancer, all while the soul, the person it was, has to watch. And they have no say in what they're doing. They watch as their body marches and works. They never get to sleep. They never get to eat. Sometimes they have to go to war and they don't want to. That's a little too thin. So it is a punishment for some. And depending on who's doing all the necromancy, sometimes the necromancers will sneak into other kingdoms and go to their graveyards and resurrect zombies and have a nice army without having to march them through kingdom territory. You just send one person, they wander through, and they resurrect a whole bunch of undead. Which is a nice surprise attack, if not that effective, because, again, they just shamble around not doing much. They can kind of fight, but they mainly just soak up damage, so they're mainly good for surprise attacks, all while your main force is waiting outside whatever city you're attacking. You send one person in, raise a whole bunch of undead to cause panic, and while everyone else is distracted, you send your main army in, and the Unworthy are good at that. It may seem like I'm a little scatterbrained. It's because this is completely improv. Like, this isn't by script. Like, this is stuff I've written down for the comic. Like, this is lore. But there's no really coherent pattern to it because it's seriously just whatever I can think of and come up with. There's no script whatsoever. These details are definitely low. I'm almost done with the base coat. He definitely looks different than he did at the start of the video. Now, sometimes depending on what you want to do, you can choose to base coat only certain parts of the model, and other parts use other colors. I mean, that can save color, but because I'm trying to get like a darker feel, I'm doing the whole thing in black, because Makaris isn't exactly a place you want to be. Unless you're a merchant or one of the rich people, because Makaris definitely has a wealth disparity problem, where the rich get richer and the poor end up in the streets, drafted into the army, or they die and Makaris decides they're unworthy. If they decide they're unworthy. Not all dead people are unworthy. As the name implies, it is a punishment, which means you have to meet the criteria to be punished to become unworthy. Just because you die doesn't automatically mean you're a skeleton. And, because it is punishment, it must be served out eventually. There is a time limit on how long you could be unworthy. And as long as the Makaris has necromancers to bring the skeletons back, you'll just keep serving and serving until your time is up, depending on what you've done. And once you're done, then you're buried, and then you can no longer become unworthy, because the law of Makaris dictates that. You can't just have a roaming army of skeletons forever. Eventually, the soul and the body must rest. As bad as Makaris are, they do have standards because they were one of the 7 swords, which, during the Ingrevian War, were 7 armies of knights that stood against the Ingrevians, and managed to last until the Ingrevians mysteriously disappeared into the bowels of the earth. After which, almost done, 5 of the 7 swords ventured out to go find if there were any survivors, because they didn't know if anyone was still alive except them. Whereas 2 of the swords settled. The Sword King Makaris and the Sword King Tulun. Huh? Oh, nope, he's missing something. Hold up. And Makaris and Tulun stayed behind, thinking that the Ingrevians were going to come for another attack, and they constantly expected another attack that never came because the Ingrevians disappeared. Upon realizing that the Ingrevians were gone and not coming back, they settled into kingdoms that were side by side with each other, which were named after themselves, Makaris and Tulun. The other 5 swords eventually founded the kingdom of Foulbirth, but that's a story for another time. Alright. Let me just rinse off my brush. Actually, I've got quite a bit of black left. I don't want to waste it. So what I'm going to do is just... What I like doing is I like having a spare miniature, specifically this guy. He's not finished, obviously. That way, I've still got some black, and I'll just use the black until it dries up or runs out. Yeah, I don't like having just one miniature I'm painting, even though I do like painting just one miniature, but if I have a lot of leftover paint, I don't like wasting it. So some miniatures are just stuff I've painted using excess paint, and they've actually turned out pretty good. Not the best, because, again, it's leftovers, but this isn't perfect painting. It's pretty okay painting. And as you can see, I'm not using the little Citadel, what's this called? Painting handle, because currently the skeleton guy is having it. So I've got to be careful and not get paint on my fingers. Not that it matters, because this washes off. And yeah, usually one of these models, these spare models I have, I'm painting 3 other models, and a lot of their spare paint ends up on him, so I'm painting a 4th model too. Especially if you're wanting to paint models one after another after another. And I like to keep the color scheme roughly the same. So this guy is a Makaris Knight.